Snow fell like a white curtain over Chicago. It turned the night streets to silver. Wind off Lake Michigan cut through the alleys, sharp as a knife. It carried a bone-deep cold that made people want only one thing: to hurry home as fast as they could. Inside the restaurant La Rosa Nera, tucked behind the skyscrapers, warm golden light spilled through fogged glass windows. The space was elegant and secretive. Black stone walls, crystal chandeliers, the lingering scent of expensive wine. This was not a place for ordinary people. This was the territory of the Moretti family. Table number 7 sat in the deepest corner, facing the window. It was always kept empty, always untouched, until he arrived. Vincent Moretti stepped through the door, 2 bodyguards in black suits moving silently behind him. He brushed a few snowflakes from his black cashmere coat and walked with a slow, unquestioned authority. He stood 6'1", broad-shouldered, with black hair slicked back and a faint scar through his right eyebrow. He did not need to say a word. The entire restaurant fell quiet. Eyes dropped. No one dared meet the steel-cold gray eyes of the boss. But if someone had the courage to look closer, they would see something else. Something distant in that gaze. A pain that smoldered. A wound that never healed. Every Friday night for the past 10 years, Vincent came here. He sat at the same table. He ordered the same thing, tiramisu, with no added sugar. Table number 7 had once belonged to Rose, his younger sister. She used to sit here every Friday night, waiting for him to pick her up after her painting class. Now that table belonged only to memory. As he waited, Vincent stared out the window, unfocused. Snow drifted down slowly, catching the streetlights like lost stars. His hand, the hand that had once squeezed a trigger without trembling, now gripped a glass of wine so tightly his knuckles turned pale. That was when he saw them. A woman and a small child stood just outside the restaurant door, huddled in the bitter wind. The woman was young, in her late 20s. Auburn brown hair curled softly beneath a worn knit hat. Her thin coat was torn at the shoulder, clearly not enough for weather like this. Her face was gaunt, her skin pale, yet she held herself with a stubborn strength as she kept her little daughter close. The two of them stared through the glass at the menu posted on the wall, a menu where one meal cost what an ordinary working person earned in a month. The child looked about 6, big, clear eyes, a face drained by the cold, shiny brown hair, fluffy beneath the hood of her coat. Her cheeks were red, her lips tinted purple, yet she still tried to smile at her mother. Vincent watched as the woman bent down and brushed her daughter's cheek with the back of her hand. Her lips moved as she asked something. The child gave a small shake of her head, then spoke. Through the fogged glass, Vincent caught only part of it. "Mom, you eat. I am not hungry. But every time your stomach hurts, my stomach hurts too. I do not want you to faint again." The wineglass in Vincent's hand stopped cold. The whole room seemed to freeze. The music, the laughter, the clink of glasses, all of it fell away. Only that sentence remained, ringing in his head like a bell. 10 years ago, Rose had said something almost the same. Back when the two of them lived in the slums, hungry and half-frozen, with no one to protect them. "Big brother, you eat. I am not hungry." Vincent set the glass down. His hand, the hand of a killer, trembled slightly. He called Marcus over, his voice low and cold. "Bring them in. Tell them the restaurant is treating them. Do not mention me." Marcus blinked, surprised, but nodded at once. In 15 years serving his boss, this was the first time he had ever seen Vincent take notice of strangers. A few minutes later, the woman and the child stepped inside, staring around in uncertainty. The restaurant was full. There were no empty tables. Marcus came back, hesitating. "Sir, there are no tables left." Vincent looked at them. The child was shivering hard. The mother tried to warm her with her arms, even though she herself was shaking with cold. His gaze stopped on table number 7, the table he had kept for Rose for 10 years, the table no one was allowed to sit at. Vincent was silent for a long time. Then he spoke, so softly Marcus had to lean closer to hear him. "Seat them here." Marcus went still. He thought he had misheard. "Sir, I will not say it a second time." It was the first time in 10 years that Vincent Moretti had shared that table with anyone, and no one knew that the small decision he made on that snowy night would change his life forever. If this story touched your heart, please press like to spread the love. Share the video with the people you love, because sometimes a story can heal more than 1,000 words. And do not forget to subscribe to the channel so you will not miss the next moving stories. Grace walked toward table number 7 with hesitant steps, her hand gripping Sophie's as if she feared someone might throw them out at any moment. She did not know who the man seated there was. She only felt the strange hush that settled over the entire restaurant as they drew closer. The eyes around them seemed to track every step the mother and child took, and Grace could have sworn she heard a few anxious whispers from the waitstaff. "I'm sorry to bother you," Grace said, her voice soft and shy. "We can sit somewhere else if—" Vincent did not look at her. He only tipped his head slightly toward the empty chair across from him, then turned his gaze back to the window. That was all he allowed himself. A small nod, no explanation, no meeting of eyes. Grace sat down and pulled Sophie into her lap to keep her warm. The red velvet chair felt so plush that for a moment she almost forgot what that kind of comfort was. How long had it been since the two of them had sat in a decent chair? A waiter brought the menu and placed it in front of Grace with an unusual kind of respect. She opened it, and her eyes widened at the price of each dish. One plate of pasta cost as much as a full week of rent in her old room. Grace swallowed, shame rising in her throat. "Mom, it's so beautiful here," Sophie whispered, her wide eyes lifting to the crystal chandelier glittering overhead. "It's like a castle in a fairy tale." Vincent still did not turn around, but he caught every word. The child's voice was clear and innocent, and it held not even a trace of fear toward the man the whole city was terrified of. "Order anything you want," Vincent said, his voice low and even. "It's on me." Grace was about to refuse, but Sophie had already let out a small, delighted sound. The little girl pointed to a picture of an Italian pasta dish on the menu, the illustration showing golden strands of noodles under bright red tomato sauce. "I want this one, Mom. But you have to eat more than me, okay?" Grace nodded, her eyes stinging. She ordered 2 pasta dishes for the two of them, not daring to look at the column of prices even once. The meal passed in silence. The soft scrape of forks against porcelain, the gentle music from the speakers, and now and then Sophie's quiet little sounds of praise. Vincent did not eat. He simply sat there, his glass of red wine barely touched, his eyes still fixed on the window where the snow kept falling. Sophie stole a few looks at the stranger. She tilted her head, studying his face with an open, unhidden curiosity. Then she tugged at her mother's sleeve and whispered softly enough that only Grace was meant to hear. Yet in this quiet room, every word still reached Vincent. "Mom, he looks like the sad prince in the fairy tales you read to me." Grace hurried to hush her, her cheeks flushing with embarrassment. But Vincent did not react. He only tightened his grip on the wineglass a little more, his eyes blinking quickly, as if he were trying to swallow something that had risen and caught in his throat. A sad prince. When was the last time anyone had seen his sadness? When was the last time anyone had cared? Rose? Rose had been the last. The meal ended. Sophie's plate was spotless, while Grace had managed only half, her stomach cramped after too many days without food. She stood and bowed her head politely toward Vincent. "Thank you so much. We don't know what to say. This is the best meal my daughter and I have had in a very long time." Vincent still did not turn around. He only gave a slight nod, signaling that she could go. Grace took Sophie's hand, ready to leave that warm table and return to the cold, snowy night outside. She did not know that in just a few seconds, her daughter would do something that would make the most powerful man in Chicago fall to his knees before the memory of his own past. Grace had taken only a few steps with Sophie when the little girl suddenly stopped and slipped her hand free from her mother's, before Grace could even ask why. Sophie turned and ran back toward table number 7 on tiny feet, small but determined. "Sophie," Grace called softly, worry tightening her voice. "What are you doing?" But Sophie did not stop. She came to a halt beside Vincent and lifted her big, clear eyes to the man who still sat motionless by the window. For the first time since they had entered, Vincent turned his head, and his cold gray gaze met the warm brown eyes of a 6-year-old child. "Sir," Sophie said, her voice small, yet strangely sincere. "I have something I want to give you." She held out both of her little hands. In her palms was something carefully wrapped in a white paper napkin, folded clumsily but with the wholehearted care only a child could give. Vincent looked down, his brow drawing together slightly. He did not understand why this child would want to give him anything at all. They were strangers. He had only bought them a meal. There was nothing to repay. "What is it?" Vincent asked, his voice still deep, but the edge of coldness softened. Sophie smiled. Her smile brightened like a small candle in a dark room. "This is my favorite thing," she said. "But I think you need it more than I do. You look very sad." Vincent stood frozen. That simple sentence was like a needle pushed straight through the armor he had built, layer by layer, for 10 long years. "You look very sad." For years he had hidden that pain behind a hard face, behind power, behind the fear he inspired in others. Yet a 6-year-old child, with eyes untouched by the world's cruelty, had seen through him in the space of one silent dinner. He reached out and accepted the tiny gift, The paper napkin felt weightless in the calloused hand of a man who had taken so many lives. "Thank you," Vincent said, his voice turning a little rough. Sophie nodded, her smile still bright. Then she spun and ran back to her mother, took Grace's hand, and waved to Vincent before the two of them stepped out the door and disappeared into the blinding white curtain of snow outside. Vincent watched until their figures were gone beyond the fogged glass. Then he looked down at the paper napkin in his hand. Slowly, he unfolded it, and Vincent Moretti's world collapsed. Resting in the white folds was a butterfly hair clip, tiny, lavender purple. Its wings were finely carved with soft, delicate lines, and on the corner of the right wing was a small scratch, almost impossible to see unless you looked closely. Vincent stopped breathing. He knew this hair clip. He knew every curve, every detail, every scratch, because he had commissioned it himself 10 years ago. It was the last birthday gift he had ever given Rose. A purple butterfly hair clip, made of high-grade, rust-proof titanium and enamel, custom-made, with only 2 in the world. One had been buried with Rose on the day of her funeral. The other had vanished without a trace the night she was shot, and Vincent had searched for it for 10 years and found nothing. Now it lay in his hand, given to him by a homeless 6-year-old girl he had met for the first time only moments ago. Vincent's hand began to tremble. Not the tremor of fear, but the tremor of a man trying to hold back the most violent wave of emotion of his entire life. He closed his fist around the clip, his knuckles whitening, his breath heavy. Marcus stood a few steps away, his face draining of color as he saw the expression on his boss's face. In 15 years at Vincent's side, he had never seen the man like this. Not anger, not icy calm, but something deeper, something more painful, as if someone had torn open an old wound Vincent had believed had healed. "Boss," Marcus said carefully, but Vincent did not hear him. He only sat there, staring at the tiny clip in his hand, and in his mind Rose's voice from 10 years ago rose up, clear as if she were beside him. "Big brother, it's so beautiful. I'll keep it forever. Forever." Vincent lifted his head and looked out the window toward the place where the mother and child had vanished. Snow still fell, white and merciless, but inside his chest, something was burning. He needed to know. He needed to know where that little girl had found this hair clip. He needed to know why fate had returned it to him after 10 years, through a child who was a complete stranger. And deep inside the heart that had been frozen for so long, Vincent Moretti felt, for the first time, a thin, fragile thread of hope that maybe, just maybe, Rose was still somewhere out there, watching him. Vincent sprang up from his chair, so suddenly that Marcus flinched and stepped back. He did not have time to grab his coat. He did not have time to give orders to anyone. The most powerful boss in Chicago burst through the door like an ordinary man chasing something more precious than his own life. The cold of the snowy night struck his face like a slap, but Vincent felt nothing. He saw only 2 small figures shrinking away at the end of the street, hand in hand, hunched against the wind. "Wait," Vincent shouted, his voice echoing down the empty night. Grace turned, her eyes widening in shock as she saw the stranger running toward them. Instinctively, she pulled Sophie closer, but Sophie had already recognized Vincent and waved. "Sad Prince," the little girl called out, her voice bright. Vincent stopped in front of them, breathing hard, snow settling on his black hair and on the shoulders of his shirt. He bent down and dropped to one knee in the cold snow so he would be level with Sophie's eyes. It was the first time in his life that Vincent Moretti had knelt before anyone, and that someone was a 6-year-old girl. "Sweetheart," Vincent said, his voice raw and trembling in a way he himself did not recognize. "This hair clip, where did you get it?" Sophie tilted her head, her big eyes blinking with innocent curiosity. "I found it," she answered, her voice clear. "Yesterday, when Mom and I walked past the place with lots of flowers." Vincent's heart tightened. "The place with lots of flowers." Sophie nodded and pointed in a distant direction. "At the corner where there's a yellow light, near a really big stone sign with letters carved in it. Mom said it's a memorial. I saw the clip wedged deep in a crack at the base of the stone, hidden behind some flowers someone put there. I had to pry it out because it was so pretty." Vincent felt as if someone had driven a fist straight into his chest. A memorial. A corner with a yellow light. Flowers. He knew that place. He knew it better than anyone in the world. It was the corner of Michigan and Oak Street, the spot where, 10 years ago, Rose had been shot to death in front of dozens of people passing by. The bullet had not been meant for her. It had been meant for Vincent. But Rose had been in the wrong place at the wrong time, and she had paid with her life. Vincent had ordered a small memorial built there, a slab of black marble engraved with Rose's name and a finely carved white rose. Every week, he had his men bring fresh flowers to place there, but he himself had never set foot in that place. Not once in 10 years. He did not dare. He could not. And now, the hair clip he believed was gone forever had appeared in the very place where Rose had drawn her last breath. Grace watched Vincent's face drain of color and sensed that something was wrong. She pulled Sophie closer, her voice gentle but worried. "Are you all right? You look—" Vincent did not answer. He remained there on one knee in the snowstorm, gripping the tiny hair clip so tightly that his knuckles went white. His eyes were on Sophie, but he was not truly seeing her. He was seeing Rose, seeing his sister smile, seeing her eyes close over a pool of red blood, seeing her hand fall limp as he ran to her. But it was too late by 20 cursed minutes. "Thank you," Vincent whispered, his voice thick with tears. "Thank you so much." Sophie did not understand why this grown man looked so sad, but she still smiled and patted Vincent's hand with her small, ice-cold fingers. "Don't be sad anymore. The butterfly will bring you good luck." Grace bowed her head in farewell, then gently led Sophie away. She did not know what was happening, but she knew this was the moment they should leave. Mother and daughter melted into the white curtain of snow, their small footprints pressed into the fresh powder, then slowly erased. Vincent stayed on one knee, alone, in the storm, his hand clenched around the hair clip as if he were holding the soul of the sister he had lost. Marcus ran out and draped a coat over his boss's shoulders, but Vincent did not move. He only stared in the direction the mother and child had vanished, tears streaming down his cheeks without any attempt to hide them. For the first time in 10 years, the most powerful mafia boss in Chicago wept in the middle of the street, and no one, not even Marcus, dared to speak a single word. The black SUV glided through Chicago's empty streets, streetlights casting a pale gold glow through fogged windows. Vincent sat in the back seat, silent as a statue, the butterfly hair clip still clenched in his fist. Marcus stole glances at his boss in the rearview mirror, but he did not dare ask a single question. In 15 years at Vincent's side, he had never witnessed anything like what he had seen tonight. The vehicle stopped in front of the tallest building in the downtown district. Vincent stepped out without waiting for Marcus to open the door, without saying a word, and walked straight into the private elevator reserved for the penthouse on the top floor. The doors slid shut, and at last he was alone. The penthouse opened before him like a palace made of cold. White marble floors, minimalist furniture of leather and metal, glass walls that looked out over the city's glittering sweep. Beautiful, expensive, and utterly soulless. There was no warmth, no laughter, no trace of life beyond the fact of him. This was not a home. This was only where Vincent endured one long night after another. He did not turn on the lights. The glow from the city outside was enough to guide him. Vincent pulled off his shirt, damp from melting snow, tossed it onto the sofa, and walked into his study. No one was allowed in this room except him, not because it held secret documents or money, but because it held something more precious than everything Vincent owned. He stopped at the wall behind the desk and pressed a spot on the wooden surface. Part of the wall slid aside, revealing a safe set flush into the wall. Vincent entered the code, 1903, representing March 19th, Rose's birthday. And the safe door opened with a soft click. Inside there was no cash, no weapons, no paperwork. Only a small wooden box, dark brown, its surface worn down by time. Vincent lifted it out with both hands, gentle as if he were raising a treasure, and carried it to the desk. He sat down and stared at the box for a long time before he opened the lid. Inside was everything that remained of Rose. A photo of the two of them taken on her 19th birthday. Rose's smile bright as summer sunlight. A handwritten birthday card in that familiar, uneven script. "Big brother is the greatest person in the world. I love you." A handkerchief embroidered with roses that Rose had sewn for him herself. And lying among those keepsakes, carefully wrapped in black velvet, was a lavender-purple butterfly hair clip. Vincent took the clip from the box and set it on the desk. Then he opened the hand he had been clenching and placed the clip Sophie had given him beside it. The two clips lay side by side. Identical. The same soft lavender purple. The same butterfly wings patterned with fine, delicate lines. The same size, the same material, and the same small scratch at the corner of the right wing. The scratch Vincent remembered Rose had made by accident the first time she wore it. There was no mistaking it. This was the other clip in the pair he had custom-made for his sister. Vincent remembered that day. Rose's last birthday. He had taken her to a famous jeweler and let her choose the design herself. Rose had chosen a butterfly, because she said butterflies meant freedom, meant dreams that could fly high. He had ordered 2 of them. One for Rose to wear, one for her to keep as a remembrance. "When you miss me, just look at it," he had said. Then Rose was gone. One clip had been buried with her. The other had vanished on that fateful night, and Vincent had searched for it for 10 years, without finding a trace. Now it was here, on his desk. Returned by a homeless 6-year-old girl who had picked it up at the very place where Rose had taken her last breath. Vincent bowed his head and covered his face with both hands. His shoulders began to shake, again and again, as if his body were trying to hold back something too large to contain. And then, in the dark penthouse, in the middle of a city of millions, the most powerful Mafia boss in Chicago wept like a child. Not the crying of weakness, but the crying of 10 years of pain, 10 years of guilt, 10 years of asking himself why he had arrived 20 minutes late that day. The crying of a brother who had lost his only sister, who had lost the only light in the dark life he had built. "Did you send it back to me, Rose?" Vincent whispered through his sobs. "Are you still here?" No one answered. Only the wind howled beyond the glass, and darkness wrapped the room like a cold embrace. Vincent sat there all night, the 2 hair clips in front of him, and for the first time in 10 years, he allowed himself to be weak. Vincent did not know how long he had been sitting in the dark. It might have been a few hours. It might have been the whole night. Time meant nothing when memory came surging back like waves that could not be held back. He closed his eyes, and the past appeared with a clarity so sharp it felt as if it had happened yesterday. 27 years earlier, in a rundown apartment on Chicago's South Side, a 10-year-old boy held his 2-year-old sister tight in the grip of a bitter winter night. There was no heater. A broken window had been patched with cardboard. The last thing the 2 children had eaten was a piece of hard, stale bread from 2 days before. That boy was Vincent, and the little sister crying from hunger in his arms was Rose. Their parents had died 1 week earlier. Their father, a dock worker, had been stabbed to death in a settling of scores between 2 gangs. Their mother, unable to bear the shock, had hanged herself in the small kitchen, leaving 2 children stranded in a ruthless world. Vincent was the one who found her. A 10-year-old boy had to cut the rope with his own hands, call the police with his own hands, and cover Rose's eyes with his own hands so she would not have to see that image. From that day on, Vincent swore he would protect Rose at any cost. He quit school. He took any work he could find to feed her. He scavenged. He washed dishes for cash. He shined shoes on the street, but the money was never enough. Rose stayed hungry. She stayed cold, and her eyes grew more hollow with each passing day of malnutrition. When Vincent was 15, a man came looking for him. It was the head of the Moretti family at the time. A man who had seen the fierce determination in a skinny teenager's eyes, while he fought 4 bigger boys just to protect a piece of bread for his sister. The man offered Vincent a job, the kind of job that once you stepped into it, there was no way back out. Vincent said yes. Not because he wanted power, not because he loved violence, but because the night before, Rose had burned with fever from malnutrition, and he did not have a single dollar to buy medicine. After that, Vincent walked into the road of darkness. He learned how to hold a gun before he learned how to hold a pen to fill out a job application. He learned how to kill before he learned how to love anyone. His hands were stained with blood, but in return, Rose went to school, ate until she was full, and lived like an ordinary girl. Rose never knew where the money came from. Vincent built a story about business, about faraway work trips, about long meetings that ran late into the night, and Rose believed him. She believed her brother was a successful businessman, a hero who had sacrificed his youth to raise her. Rose grew into a beautiful, gifted young woman, with clear eyes and a smile bright as the sun. She studied fine arts at the University of Chicago, loved painting, and dreamed that one day she would hold her own exhibition. Vincent stayed in the shadows, watching his sister shine, and he felt that everything he had done was worth it. But darkness never forgives anyone who tries to escape it. Vincent's enemies found the one weakness of the man everyone feared, and on one fateful night, the bullet meant for him stole Rose's life instead. Vincent opened his eyes and pulled himself out of the current of pain. He looked down at the wooden box, where one thing remained that he had not dared to touch for 10 years. A letter Rose had written the night before she died. A letter he found in her room after the funeral. Vincent's hand trembled as he lifted the envelope, yellowed with age. He had read it once, only once, on the night after Rose was buried, and he had never dared to open it again, because every word inside had felt like a blade cutting into his heart. But tonight, after the hair clip returned, Vincent felt he had to read it again. He needed to hear Rose's voice again, even if it came only through ink on paper. He pulled the letter out, unfolded each crease carefully, and began to read by the faint light of the city beyond the glass. My beloved big brother, I am writing this letter not because something has happened, but because I want you to know the things I have never been able to say out loud. You always think you have to be strong for me, that you have to carry everything alone. But big brother, I know it all. I know what you have sacrificed so I can have this life. I do not know the details, but I know your eyes carry a pain you never let me see. I want you to know that no matter who you are, no matter what you do, in my eyes you will always be the most wonderful big brother in the world. You deserve to be loved. You deserve to be happy. Do not live forever in the darkness because of me, big brother. Find someone to love. Allow yourself to be happy. That is what I want most. I will love you forever. Rose. The letter slipped from Vincent's hand. He bowed over the desk, his shoulders shaking in waves, and tears fell onto the wood, soaking into memories that had long ago gone cold. I am sorry, Rose, Vincent whispered into the empty night. I could not do what you wanted. I cannot be happy when you are not here. But deep inside his breaking heart, Vincent knew the hair clip's return was not an accident. Maybe Rose was trying to tell him something. Maybe, just maybe, it was time for him to learn how to live on. Morning sunlight slid through the tall panes of the penthouse windows, stirring Vincent from a fitful sleep in the desk chair. He could not remember when he had drifted off. He only knew that when he opened his eyes, Rose's letter still lay on the desk, and the two hair clips still rested side by side, like a reminder of the night before. Vincent stood, his body aching from being folded over in that chair all night. He walked to the window and looked down at Chicago, slowly waking beneath its blanket of snow. Crowded streets, cars strung along in lines, people moving fast, pulled along by lives that belonged only to them. And somewhere in this vast city, a young woman and her little daughter were living a hardship he could not even imagine. He thought of Sophie's clear eyes, of the child's innocent words, of the small gift that had shaken his world. He thought of Grace, of her pale, gaunt face, and the way she had still held her daughter close with a stubborn kind of courage in the freezing night. Who were they? Why had fate brought them to his restaurant on that exact night? Why had that child found Rose's hair clip? Too many questions spun through Vincent's mind. And he, a man used to controlling everything, could not endure the feeling of knowing nothing about the people who had touched the most hidden place in his heart. He picked up the phone and dialed Marcus. Come to my penthouse, right now. 15 minutes later, Marcus appeared at the door. He was still wearing the same black suit from the night before, dark circles under his eyes from lack of sleep, but his posture was straight and ready for orders. In 15 years with Vincent, Marcus had grown used to sudden calls in the middle of the night or at dawn, but looking at his boss's face now, he knew this was not an ordinary call. What do you need, boss? Vincent turned. His gray eyes fixed on Marcus with a gravity he rarely gave to anything that was not business. The woman and the child from last night, Vincent said, his voice low and precise. I need to know who they are. Names, address, work, family, everything. Find out within 24 hours. Marcus blinked, surprise breaking through the usual calm of his face. In 15 years, he had watched Vincent order killings without a flicker, had seen him face enemies without fear, had seen him step past bodies as if they were weeds underfoot, but never, not once, had Marcus seen Vincent care about strangers like this. Boss, may I ask why? Vincent was silent for a long time. He looked toward the desk, where the two hair clips still lay side by side, then looked back at Marcus. That child has something that belonged to Rose, he said, his voice softening slightly. I need to know why. Marcus understood at once. He did not ask anything else. He did not need more explanation. The name Rose was enough to tell him this was no joke. For 10 years, his boss had lived like a ghost. He loved no one. He trusted no one. He allowed no one into his world. But today, for the first time, Marcus saw something else in those steel-gray eyes. Not anger, not indifference, but hope. A thin, fragile hope, like a candle flame trembling in the wind. I will find them before tonight, Marcus said, bowing his head. You have my word. Vincent nodded, dismissing him. When the door closed, he turned back to the window and looked down at the city again. Somewhere out there, Grace and Sophie were living their lives, unaware that the most powerful Mafia boss in Chicago was searching for them. Not to hurt them, but to find answers to the questions that had haunted him all night, and perhaps to find the reason Rose had led them to him. That afternoon, Marcus returned to the penthouse with a black leather briefcase in his hand. Vincent was standing by the window as usual, but this time he turned the instant he heard the door open. All day long he had been unable to focus on anything. He could not sign a single document. He could not sit through a meeting. His mind kept circling back to the image of a mother and child huddled in the snowy night, and to the clear eyes of a 6-year-old girl who had placed the most precious gift of his life into his hands. "I found information," Marcus said, setting the briefcase on the desk and pulling out a thick file. "But you need to prepare yourself." Vincent frowned and stepped closer. He had never needed to prepare himself for anything. He had faced death, betrayal, and loss without trembling. But looking at Marcus's expression, he knew what he was about to hear would not be simple. Marcus opened the file and turned to the first page, where a photograph was clipped. In the picture was a young woman with softly curled auburn brown hair and green eyes, wearing a student uniform, smiling brightly in front of the University of Chicago. "Grace Sullivan," Marcus began, 29 years old, born into a poor working-class family in the suburbs. Her mother left when she was little. Her father was an alcoholic and died of cirrhosis when she was 16. She supported herself with part-time work, studied hard, and earned a full scholarship in fine arts at the University of Chicago. Vincent studied the photo and recognized the woman from the night before at once. She had changed so much. Her face was thinner, paler, and her eyes no longer held the light they carried in this student picture. Life had taken too much from her. "In her 3rd year, she became pregnant," Marcus continued. "The child's father is Derek Hansen, a drug addict she met at the bar where she worked. She was forced to drop out to have the baby, and afterward she married Derek because he promised he would change." Vincent's hand tightened, a sense of dread settling in his chest. "Derek did not change," Marcus said, his voice dropping. "He kept using. He did not work. And he began abusing Grace when Sophie was only a few months old. She endured it for 5 years, trying to shield her daughter from a violent father, until 2 years ago, when Derek was drunk and nearly beat her to death in front of Sophie. She finally decided to divorce him." A flare of anger rose in Vincent's chest. He did not know Grace, but the image of a woman abused for 5 years made him think of his own mother, a woman who had carried too much before she chose to end it. "After the divorce, Derek threw her and Sophie out," Marcus continued. "She had no relatives, no savings, and no one would hire a single mother without a degree. She lived in a shelter for a few months, but then she was put out for overstaying. Right now, the 2 of them are living on the street, sleeping in subway stations or under bridges, and Grace survives by doing nighttime cleaning work." Vincent closed his eyes, and the image of Grace holding Sophie in the freezing night rose sharp in his mind. How many nights like that had they endured? How many nights of hunger and cold? How many nights with no roof? How many nights had she held her child and cried in silence? "Is there anything else?" Vincent asked, his voice rough. Marcus hesitated for a second, then turned to the next page of the file. He placed another photograph on the desk, and Vincent felt as if someone had driven a fist into his chest. In the picture were 2 young women standing side by side in an art studio, both wearing smocks splattered with paint. One was Grace, smiling brightly, and the other, the one with her arm linked through Grace's and eyes bright as stars, was Rose. Grace Sullivan was in the same fine arts cohort as Miss Rose, Marcus said, his voice gentle, as if afraid to break something fragile. According to classmates, they were close friends, very close. Rose used to let Grace sleep in her dorm when she had nowhere to go. Rose also wrote a recommendation letter that helped Grace get her first part-time job. Vincent stood perfectly still, his eyes locked on the photograph. Rose was smiling there, the smile he had carried with him every day for 10 years. And beside her was Grace, the woman fate had brought to his restaurant last night, the woman whose daughter had placed Rose's hair clip into his hand. "Why didn't I know about her?" Vincent whispered, his voice trembling. "Rose never spoke about her friends to you," Marcus answered. "Maybe she wanted to keep the 2 worlds separate, but from what I found, Grace Sullivan was Rose's closest friend throughout college." Vincent picked up the photograph, his fingers shaking as they touched his sister's face. Rose had had a friend that good, and he had never known. Rose had helped Grace, protected her, and now Grace was living a life of misery Rose would never have wanted to see. This was not chance. Vincent believed that with everything in him, Rose had led Grace to him, through the hair clip, through Sophie, through that fateful snowy night, and he knew what he had to do. The next day, Vincent came to La Rosanera earlier than usual. He called the manager over, handed him a small business card with only a single phone number printed on it, and gave him a brief order. "If the woman and the child from the other night came back, give her this card and tell her that someone wants to thank them." The manager nodded and did not dare ask anything more. No one in the restaurant dared to question the boss. 3 days passed. Vincent waited. He was not used to this feeling of waiting, The restless tension every time his phone vibrated, the sting of disappointment every time he realized it was not the call he was hoping for. He, a man who was used to controlling everything, was now letting a stranger determine the calm of his mind. By the afternoon of the fourth day, Vincent's phone finally rang. An unfamiliar number. "Hello," a gentle voice said on the other end. "I was given this number and told to call if I wanted to say thank you. I think it should be the other way around." Vincent recognized Grace's voice immediately. He rose so fast from his chair that his heart beat harder than it usually did. "Grace," he said, his voice low, but softer than the way he spoke to anyone else. "I want to see you, and Sophie, just to talk." There was a short silence on the line. Vincent could feel Grace's hesitation, the wariness of a woman who had lived through too much suffering to trust a stranger easily. "I do not know who you are," Grace said carefully, "and I have nothing to repay you for that dinner." "I do not need you to repay me," Vincent replied. "I only want to talk about the hair clip Sophie gave me. It means more to me than you think." Silence again. Then Grace let out a quiet sigh. "All right, but I choose the place." Vincent agreed at once. He would go anywhere Grace wanted, whether it was a palace or the space beneath a bridge. That Sunday, Vincent stood in front of a small coffee shop in a modest neighborhood on the south side of Chicago. No crystal chandeliers, no red velvet chairs, only simple wooden seats and the smell of cheap coffee. He had taken off his expensive cashmere coat and replaced it with a plain gray sweater. No bodyguards, no escort vehicles, only him, alone, like an ordinary man. The doorbell rang, and Grace walked in with Sophie. She wore an old coat, but it was clean, and her auburn brown hair was tied neatly at the nape of her neck. Sophie ran straight to Vincent the moment she recognized him, her big round eyes lighting up like two stars. "Sad prince," the little girl cried, with no shyness at all. "Did you keep the butterfly I gave you?" Vincent bent down until he was level with Sophie's eyes. And then something like a miracle happened. The corner of his mouth lifted, slowly, as if he had forgotten how to do it for years. A smile. The first smile Vincent Moretti had shown since the day Rose died. "I kept it very carefully," he said, his voice so warm that even he was surprised by it. "It is the most precious gift I have ever received." Sophie grinned broadly and turned to show her mother. "See, Mom, I told you. The butterfly will bring good things." Grace watched the two of them. There was still a trace of caution in her eyes, but it had softened. She sat down across from Vincent, her hand resting on Sophie's shoulder in an instinctive gesture of protection. "I still do not understand," Grace said. "Why is an old hair clip so important to you?" Vincent looked at her, then at Sophie, who was busy scribbling on a paper napkin. He drew in a deep breath, preparing to say something he had never said to anyone except Marcus. "Because that hair clip belonged to my sister," he said, his voice dropping. "My sister's name was Rose, and you, Grace, you were her closest friend." The coffee cup in Grace's hand slipped and struck the table, brown liquid spilling across the wood. Her eyes widened, her lips trembled, and all the scattered pieces in her mind suddenly fell into place as a single, complete picture. "Rose," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You are Rose's brother." Grace sat there as if she had turned to stone, her green eyes fixed on Vincent without truly seeing him. Her mind was spinning, fragments of memory from years ago rushing back like a flood she could not hold back. Rose. That name, that face, that smile. She had tried to bury them in the deepest corner of her heart for so many years. "Rose Moretti," Grace whispered, her voice shaking. "She never told me her full name, just Rose. I didn't know she was a Moretti." Vincent nodded slowly. He understood why Rose had hidden her last name. In Chicago, the name Moretti meant the Mafia, violence, darkness. Rose had wanted an ordinary life, ordinary friends, a life not haunted by the shadow of her family. Sophie looked up at her mother, worry filling her big eyes as she saw Grace's face go pale. The little girl reached out and took her mother's hand, giving it a gentle squeeze, a small comfort she had learned from nights when the two of them had held each other and cried in the dark. "Mom, what's wrong?" Sophie asked. Grace swallowed hard, forcing herself to steady her breathing for her daughter. She drew in a deep breath, then turned to Vincent with eyes already rimmed in red. "Rose was the only friend who was ever truly good to me in college," she began, her voice thick with emotion. "On the first day in the drawing class, I sat alone in the corner because I didn't know anyone. My clothes were worn out, my shoes were coming apart, and I knew I didn't belong there. But Rose came and sat beside me, smiled, and told me I drew better than anyone in the class. Vincent listened in silence. Every word from Grace felt like another piece of a life he had missed, a life his sister had lived while he was busy working in the darkness. She knew I was poor, Grace went on. She knew I worked 3 jobs at the same time just to keep up with school. She knew there were nights I had nowhere to sleep because I couldn't afford rent, but she never looked at me with pity. She only helped, quietly, letting me sleep in her dorm room when the weather turned cold, sharing food when she knew I was hungry, writing a recommendation so I could get my first part-time job at a coffee shop. Tears began to slide down Grace's cheeks, but she did not bother wiping them away. She had held these tears in for too long. Rose was light, Grace said, her voice breaking. In my darkest days, she was the only one who made me believe life could still be worth living. She trusted me when the whole world turned its back. She was the sister I never had. Vincent felt his throat tighten. He had never known Rose had done those things. He had given her money, given her comfort, but he had not known she had used her own heart to save other people. And then one day, she vanished, Grace said, her voice dropping, as if she were speaking of a wound that had never healed. Not a goodbye, not a message. I called, but no one answered. I went to her dorm, but her room was empty. I asked everywhere, but no one knew where she had gone. She disappeared as if she had never existed. Grace looked at Vincent, her eyes full of pain and confusion. I wondered for years. Did I do something wrong? Did I say something that made her angry? Why would she leave without a word? I kept thinking maybe she just wanted to cut me off. Maybe I wasn't good enough to be her friend. Vincent lowered his head, both hands clenched on the table. He knew the answer to every question Grace had asked, and he knew the truth would break her heart all over again. Rose didn't leave, Vincent said, his voice low and heavy. She didn't cut anyone off. He stopped and drew in a deep breath to find the courage. For 10 years, he had never spoken these words to anyone except Marcus. But Grace deserved the truth. Rose died, Vincent said, his voice splitting. 10 years ago, she was shot to death in the street. Grace's world collapsed. She sat there with her mouth parted but no sound coming out, her eyes empty, as if someone had pulled the soul right out of her body. Rose was dead. The only friend who had ever truly cared about her had been gone for 10 years, and she had never known. No, Grace whispered, shaking her head. That can't be. Rose can't. But when she looked into Vincent's gray eyes, filled with suffering, she knew he was not lying. Tears broke loose like a river. Her body trembled in waves, and a strangled sob rose from deep in her chest. Sophie panicked, climbed into her mother's lap, and wrapped her arms tightly around her. Don't cry, Mom. I'm here. Vincent sat across from them, watching the mother and child hold each other, and felt his own heart squeeze tight. Grace's grief was grief he knew too well. Losing Rose, losing the only light in his life, was a wound that could never truly heal. And now 2 strangers, bound together by the same loss, sat facing each other in a modest coffee shop, and mourned the young woman who had left the world far too soon. When Grace's tears finally eased, she lifted her head and looked at Vincent with eyes swollen and red. She needed to know more. She needed to know what had happened to her closest friend, the one who had vanished from her life without a single goodbye. No matter how much it hurt, she had to hear it. What happened? Grace asked, her voice rough from crying. How did Rose die? Vincent closed his eyes, and the most painful memories of his life rushed in like a nightmare with no end. For 10 years he had told this story to himself 1,000 times, torturing himself with every detail, every second he wished he could change. But he had never spoken it out loud to anyone. It was my fault, Vincent began, his voice low and broken. All of it was my fault. He told Grace about his real life, about the darkness he had stepped into to raise Rose, about the enemies he had made through the years. As he climbed to the top of power, he told her about that fateful night, when Rose called and asked him to pick her up after her class exhibition. She was happy because one of her paintings had been chosen to be displayed, and she wanted to share that joy with her brother. I told her I would come, Vincent continued, his voice tightening. But then there was an important meeting, a major deal. I thought it would be only 20 minutes, and then I would go get her. Only 20 minutes. He stopped, his hands clenched so tightly his knuckles went white. 20 minutes. 20 minutes that had changed everything. Rose waited for me at the corner of Michigan and Oak Street, Vincent said. She didn't know my enemies had been watching her for days, waiting for the right moment. That bullet was meant for me. They thought I would arrive on time like I always did, but I was late, and Rose was standing there alone. Tears slid down Vincent's cheeks, and he did not wipe them away. He had cried too much in the dark. He did not have the strength to hide it anymore. When I got there, she was lying in a pool of blood. His voice broke. I held her in my arms and called her name, but she didn't answer. Her eyes were still open, looking up at the sky, but she wasn't seeing anything anymore. I was 20 minutes late. 20 minutes killed my sister. Grace sat there, tears spilling again as she listened. She could feel Vincent's pain. The pain of a brother who had spent his whole life trying to protect his sister, only to lose her because of a 20-minute delay. And she understood why Vincent had lived like a ghost for 10 years. He had not only lost Rose, he had lost himself. Without thinking, Grace reached across the table and took Vincent's trembling hand. Her hand was small and thin, but its warmth made Vincent look up in surprise. "That wasn't your fault," Grace said, her voice gentle but firm. "You didn't pull the trigger. You didn't know what would happen. You were just a brother doing everything you could for your sister. Rose would never want you to punish yourself like this." Vincent looked at Grace, his gray eyes full of pain and also of shock. For 10 years, no one had ever said those words to him. No one had dared look him in the eye and tell him it was not his fault. And now a woman he had only just met, a woman who had lost her closest friend to Rose's death, was the first person to offer him forgiveness. "You don't blame me?" Vincent asked, his voice hoarse. Grace shook her head, tears still clinging to her lashes. "I blame the people who killed her. I blame a fate that was too cruel. But I don't blame you. Rose loved you. She always talked about her brother with pride, even though she never told me his name. She wouldn't want you to live inside guilt like this." A quiet silence settled over them, heavy, yet strangely relieving, as if part of the burden had finally been shared, as if part of the pain had finally been understood. And then Sophie's clear laugh broke through the weight of it. The little girl came back from the counter, with both arms wrapped around a large cup of hot cocoa, nearly as big as her face, with whipped cream smeared all over her nose. "Mom, Mr. Vincent," Sophie shouted, grinning wide. "The lady gave me a free cocoa because she said I'm cute." Grace laughed through her tears, and Vincent, for the first time in 10 years, felt something warm spread through the cold hollow of his chest. Maybe this was what Rose wanted him to find. Not forgiveness from others, but forgiveness for himself, warmed by the love of the people who were still alive. 2 weeks had passed since the meeting at the coffee shop. Vincent and Grace stayed in touch by phone, short conversations about Rose, about life, about the memories they both held close. Vincent had quietly arranged a steadier cleaning job for Grace in an office building under the control of the Moretti family, with wages high enough for her to rent a small room for herself and her daughter. Grace did not know who was behind that help, and Vincent had no intention of letting her know. He only wanted to do what Rose would have done if she were still alive. That afternoon, Grace stood in front of the elementary school gate, waiting for Sophie as usual. She wore a new coat she had been able to buy with her first paycheck, and her face was no longer as pale as before. Life was slowly improving, and Grace began to believe that maybe, just maybe, fate had stopped punishing her. But she was wrong. "You think you can hide from me?" A voice she knew too well, a voice that made her skin crawl, rose up behind her. Grace froze. She turned, and her blood seemed to turn to ice when she saw Derek standing less than 3 steps away. He was thinner than before, his face hollow, his eyes bloodshot, his beard unshaven. His breath reeked of cheap alcohol, and he swayed as if he might fall at any moment. "Derek." Grace stepped back, her voice trembling. "What are you doing here?" Derek gave a harsh laugh and moved closer. "I've been looking for you for months. You think moving somewhere else means I can't find you. You forget who I am." Grace kept backing away, her eyes darting toward the school gate where children were starting to pour out. She could not let Sophie see this. She could not. "You're drunk." Grace tried to keep her voice steady. "Go home. We have nothing left to say to each other." "Nothing left to say," Derek roared, lunging forward to grab Grace's wrist. "You're my wife. Sophie is my kid. You don't have the right to take my daughter away from me." Grace tried to yank her hand free, but she could not. Derek's grip clamped down like a vice, pain shooting up her arm, so sharp she had to grind her teeth to keep from crying out. Around them, other parents began to look their way, but no one came closer. No one wanted to get involved, especially when the man looked dangerous. "Let me go." Grace struggled, fighting to pull away. "We're divorced. You don't have the right." "Divorced?" Derek laughed like a madman. "That stupid piece of paper doesn't mean a thing. You belong to me. Your daughter belongs to me." He yanked Grace hard, throwing her off balance so she stumbled forward. And then, before she could react, Derek grabbed her auburn hair and jerked her head back. Grace cried out in pain, tears spilling over. Mom. Sophie's scream rang out from the school gate. The little girl ran toward them, her small backpack thumping against her back with each frantic step. When she saw her mother's hair in Derek's fist, Sophie shrieked, her wide eyes flooded with terror. Let my mom go. Let my mom go. Derek turned to look at Sophie, his bloodshot eyes flashing with a wild light. Well, look at that, my daughter's here. Come to Daddy. Grace fought harder, ignoring the pain. Don't touch my child. Sophie, run. Run, baby. But Sophie did not run. She stood there, sobbing, her feet locked to the ground by fear. She had seen this too many times before, and that fear had sunk deep into her bones. Derek was about to step toward Sophie when tires screamed. A black SUV braked hard at the curb, rubber grinding against the street with a sharp, shrill sound. The door swung open, and a man stepped out. Vincent Moretti. He wore a black coat, his hair slicked back neat and controlled, but his gray eyes were no longer cold. They burned like red-hot coals, and his gaze locked onto Derek with pure killing intent. Derek stared at the stranger, still holding Grace by the hair. Who the hell are you? The new boyfriend of this bitch. Get out of here. This is my family business. Vincent did not say a word. He only walked forward, step by step, slow and threatening, like a panther closing in on its prey. And in Vincent's eyes, Derek saw something that made fear begin to shake him. The eyes of a killer. Derek still had not even understood what was happening when Vincent was suddenly right in front of him. The distance between them was no more than an arm's length, and Derek could feel the weight of danger radiating from this stranger. He tried to gather himself, to pull back the swagger, his mouth opening to spit out something ugly, but before a single sound could leave him, Vincent's fist came down. The punch was lightning fast, heavy as a sledgehammer. It cracked into Derek's jaw and made him release Grace immediately. Derek stumbled and collapsed to the ground, blood spilling from the corner of his mouth, his head spinning from the shock of it. He tried to push himself up, but Vincent was already there. One hand caught Derek by the collar and hauled him up as if he weighed nothing at all, like a limp puppet. Then Vincent slammed him back against a nearby wall. Vincent's gray eyes were terrifyingly cold now, empty of anything except contempt and a smoldering fury held tightly under control. Listen, Vincent said, his voice low, slow, each word placed as if he were carving it into the man's mind. I'm only going to say this once. If you show up near them again, even one more time, I will show you what hell looks like. Derek trembled as he tried to meet the stranger's eyes, and what he saw sent an icy chill up his spine. These were not the eyes of an ordinary man. These were the eyes of someone who had seen death too many times, who had caused death too many times, and who would not hesitate if he had to do it again. Derek had crossed paths with dangerous people in the years of his addiction, but no one had ever frightened him the way this man did. Who are you? Derek stammered, his voice shaking, all the bravado gone. Vincent tilted his head slightly. The corner of his mouth lifted into a cold, humorless smile. I'm the kind of man you never want to meet a second time. And if you think I'm joking, go ahead. Try showing up near Grace or Sophie again. I promise you, they will never find your body. There was no exaggeration in that threat. Derek could feel it in every trembling cell of his body. This man was not talking to sound tough. This man could do it, and would do it, without hesitation. Vincent released him, letting Derek drop to the ground like an empty sack. Derek scrambled upright, not daring to look Vincent in the eyes anymore. He kept his head down and backed away. His legs shook uncontrollably. Blood still ran from the corner of his mouth down his chin, but he did not dare wipe it. He only wanted to get away as fast as he could. I'm leaving, Derek babbled. I won't come back. I swear. I swear. Then he turned and ran toward the end of the street as if the devil were at his heels, his gait unsteady from drink and from fear. Vincent stood there and watched until Derek disappeared around the corner. Vincent's gray eyes still cold, still alert. He knew men like Derek. They were cowards when faced with someone stronger, but they came back for revenge when the moment felt safe. Vincent would have to keep an eye on him. Only when he was sure Derek was far enough away did Vincent turn back. Grace was sitting on the sidewalk, one hand cradling her bruised wrist, her face drained of color from fear and pain. She looked up at Vincent with tear-filled eyes, her lips trembling, unable to form any words. But before Vincent could even step toward her, a small body rushed into him. Sophie wrapped both arms around his leg, clinging to his knee as if she were afraid he would vanish. She looked up, her face still wet with tears, but her big round eyes shone with something Vincent had never seen anyone look at him with. "Uncle Vincent," Sophie said, her voice still thick with sobs, yet full of awe. "You're a superhero." Vincent stood motionless, not knowing how to respond. All his life he had been called many things. Boss, killer, devil, but a superhero. No one had ever called him that. No one had ever looked at him with admiration instead of fear. He bent down and gently stroked Sophie's hair, and for the first time, he did not know what to say. This child, with clear eyes and a pure heart, was seeing him in a way no one ever had, not as a frightening mafia boss, but as a man protecting people who could not protect themselves. Grace stood, stepped closer, and without a single word, she wrapped her arms around him. Her embrace trembled, but it was warm, and Vincent, a man who had kept his heart frozen for 10 years, felt something inside his chest beginning, slowly, to thaw. "Thank you," Grace whispered against his ear, her voice breaking. "Thank you for coming." Vincent did not answer. He only lifted one arm to hold Grace by the shoulder, while his other hand remained on Sophie's head. The three of them stood there on the crowded sidewalk, like a small family sheltering one another against the storms of life. That night, after bringing Grace and Sophie back to the small rented room where the two of them were staying, Vincent stood in silence and looked around the cramped, shabby space. The room was only about 10 square meters. The walls were stained with spreading patches of damp and mold. The window had no curtains. A worn-out single bed was where mother and daughter slept together every night. There was no private kitchen, no private bathroom, only a small corner where a few sets of clothes had been folded neatly, and Sophie's backpack rested beside them. Vincent had seen poverty in many forms in his life, but seeing Rose's closest friend living like this made him feel as if something were tightening around his heart and squeezing until it hurt to breathe. "You cannot keep living here," Vincent said, his voice low but firm. "Derek knows this place. He will come back, and next time, I might not get here in time." Grace was sitting on the bed, still holding Sophie, who had fallen asleep from exhaustion after a day that had shattered them both. She lifted her head to look at Vincent, her green eyes tired, yet still lit with that familiar stubbornness. "I know," she said softly, but with quiet determination. "But I cannot accept anything more from you. You have already helped us too much. The job, the pay, and now what happened today. I owe you more than I can ever say." Vincent frowned. He had expected her to refuse. She had pride, the kind that not even her hardest years could grind down. He admired it, and it also frightened him. "This is not about owing me," Vincent said, stepping closer and lowering himself into the old wooden chair across from her. "I have an empty apartment in a good, secure area, with guards on duty 24 hours a day. No one can get in without permission. You and Sophie will be safe there." Grace shook her head, her gaze dropping to her daughter's sleeping face. "I can't. I don't want to live depending on anyone. I depended on Derek for years, and look at what it turned me into. I need to stand on my own feet for Sophie, for myself." Vincent stayed quiet for a long moment, studying the steady strength in Grace's face under the weak yellow light. He understood her, better than almost anyone, because he had once been the same, refusing help because he believed accepting it meant weakness. But sometimes accepting help was not weakness. Sometimes it was courage. "Grace," Vincent said, and his voice softened, carrying an emotion he rarely allowed to show. "This is not help. This is protection. Protection for someone Rose loved." Grace lifted her head, her eyes meeting Vincent's. "Rose gave you a place to sleep when you had nowhere to go," Vincent continued. "She shared food with you. She wrote a recommendation letter so you could get work. She thought of you like a sister, and if Rose were still alive, she would never let you live in this room, never let Sophie grow up in fear. I cannot bring Rose back, but I can do what she would have done. Let me do it, not because of you, because of Rose." Tears slid down Grace's cheeks. She bowed her head, her shoulders trembling faintly, and Vincent could see her pride wrestling with her love for her child. After a moment, she lifted her head and gave a small nod. "All right," Grace said, her voice thick. "For Sophie. And for Rose." 3 days later, Grace and Sophie moved into the new apartment. It was not luxurious, but it was warm and clean, with 2 bedrooms, a small living room, and a real kitchen of their own. When Sophie stepped into the bedroom that had been prepared for her, with walls painted a soft pale pink and a bed covered with a butterfly-patterned blanket, she stopped as if she had been struck still, her big eyes wide with disbelief. "Mom," Sophie whispered, her voice trembling. "Is this my room?" Grace knelt beside her, tears rising again. "Yes, sweetheart, this is your room. Your very own room." Sophie turned to look at Vincent standing in the doorway, then ran to him and threw her arms around him, her small hands gripping his waist as if she were afraid it might all disappear. "Thank you, Uncle Vincent," she said, her voice caught with emotion. "Thank you for giving me a home." Vincent stood very still, then slowly placed his hand on Sophie's soft brown hair. And in that moment, for the first time in 10 years, his own cold apartment was no longer the only place that made him want to come home. 1 week after Grace and Sophie moved into the new apartment, Vincent invited the two of them to his penthouse for dinner. He did not know why he did it. He only knew that when he saw Grace's message, a photo of Sophie painting in her new room, he had answered with an invitation before he had time to think. And when Grace agreed, something strange spread through his chest, a feeling he had forgotten for a very long time. That afternoon, Vincent stood in the middle of the modern, fully equipped kitchen he had never used, looking around with a rare kind of confusion. He could run an entire underground empire. He could face the most dangerous enemies without fear. But cooking was something completely beyond him. In the end, he decided to order pizza. Simple, safe, and Sophie would definitely like it. When the doorbell rang, Vincent opened the door and saw the two of them standing on the threshold. Grace wore a simple cream-colored knit dress, her auburn hair falling softly over her shoulders, her face no longer as pale as it used to be. Sophie held a sheet of drawing paper in her hands, her eyes lighting up the moment she saw Vincent. "Uncle Vincent, I drew this for you," Sophie cried, holding the paper out toward him. Vincent bent down and took the drawing. On the page were 3 people holding hands: a tall man in black, a woman with brown hair, and a tiny little girl standing between them. Above the drawing, Sophie had scribbled the words, "My family," in purple. Vincent stood very still, his fingers trembling slightly as they touched the paper. Family, a word he had stopped thinking about since the day Rose was gone. "You drew this beautifully," he said, his voice turning a little rough. "I will hang it up." Sophie grinned and ran inside the penthouse, her eyes widening at the vast space and the glass walls that looked out over the whole city. Grace stepped in after her. She could not hide her surprise either. But she said nothing. She only gave Vincent a small, gentle smile, like a quiet thank you. Dinner began with 3 pizza boxes set in the middle of the table, a few cans of soda for Sophie, and a bottle of wine. Vincent did not open in the end, because it did not feel right for a family kind of evening like this. The 3 of them sat around the large marble dining table, the table Vincent had never shared a meal at with anyone since he bought this penthouse. Sophie talked the most. She asked Vincent about everything, from why he had a scar on his eyebrow, to what his favorite color was, to whether he kept any pets. Vincent answered each question patiently, something that surprised even him. He said the scar was from falling off a bicycle when he was little, a harmless lie. He said his favorite color was purple, the color of the roses Rose loved, and he admitted he had never had a pet because he did not know how to take care of one. "Then I will teach you," Sophie shouted. "I know how to take care of a goldfish. Mom promised she would buy me one if I behave." Grace smiled and shook her head. "You say that like you are an expert. You have never had a goldfish in your life." "But I saw it on television," Sophie argued, and even Vincent had to laugh. The laughter of the 3 of them filled the penthouse, breaking the cold silence that had covered this place for years. Warm yellow light spilled over the table. The smell of pizza rose into the air. Sophie's bright chatter created an atmosphere this home had never known. Grace sat across from Vincent, quietly watching him while Sophie was busy telling a story about a cat she had seen at school the day before. Grace watched the way Vincent listened with patience to every small, scattered detail of her daughter's stories. The way he nodded. The way he asked questions as if those silly little things were the most important matters in the world. This man, the powerful Mafia boss the whole city feared, was sitting here eating pizza with a 6-year-old girl, laughing at childish jokes. Grace's heart began to beat strangely in her chest, a rhythm she had not felt in a long time, maybe not ever. It was not gratitude. It was not appreciation. It was something deeper, warmer, and also more frightening. She lowered her head quickly and pretended to wipe her mouth, trying to hide the heat rising in her face. She should not have feelings like this. She should not. She could not. But when she lifted her eyes again and caught Vincent's gray gaze resting on her with a gentleness she had never seen before, Grace knew that maybe it was already too late to stop her heart. Dinner had ended long ago, but no one wanted to leave. Sophie lay curled up on the large sofa, a thin blanket Vincent had taken from the bedroom draped gently over her. After an evening of non-stop laughter and talking, her small body had finally surrendered to sleep, her breathing steady, her face peaceful as an angel. Grace stood beside her daughter and softly stroked Sophie's warm brown hair. She meant to wake her and go back to the apartment. But Vincent spoke first. "Let her sleep," he said, his voice gentle. "It's late. You can stay the night if you want." Grace hesitated, But when she looked at Sophie's sleeping face, she could not bring herself to wake her. In the end, she nodded and followed Vincent out to the balcony, where the view held all of Chicago in the night. The city stretched beneath them like a sea of lights. Tall buildings glittered. Roads lay like bright ribbons winding through the dark. And far away, Lake Michigan reflected the silver of the moon. A cool night wind moved across the balcony, carrying the taste of winter drawing near. Grace stood at the railing, wrapping her arms around herself for warmth. Vincent noticed. Without a word, he slipped off his coat and set it over her shoulders. Grace turned toward him, ready to refuse, but Vincent had already looked away, as if nothing had happened. "Aren't you cold?" Grace asked softly. "I'm used to it," Vincent replied, his eyes still on the distance. "I've stood out here alone for years. The cold outside is nothing compared to the cold inside." Grace said nothing. She understood what he meant. She pulled the coat tighter around herself, feeling the lingering warmth and the faint trace of his masculine cologne, a scent unfamiliar to her, and yet it made her feel strangely safe. "Thank you," she said, and she was not only speaking of the coat, for everything, for Sophie, for tonight, for giving us a home. Vincent turned to look at her, his gray eyes softened by the warm yellow light spilling from the penthouse behind them. "You don't need to thank me. Rose would want me to do this." "Is it only because of Rose?" Grace asked, her voice so light it was almost a whisper. Vincent did not answer right away. He looked into Grace's green eyes, and for the first time he did not know what to say. For 10 years he had built walls around his heart, high and unbreakable, letting no one inside. But this woman, with her fierce strength and her gentle smile, had somehow found a way through. A gust of wind lifted a strand of Grace's auburn hair and let it fall across her cheek. She started to raise her hand, but Vincent moved first. His hand, the hand that had once held guns and taken lives, rose now with quiet care and tucked that strand behind her ear. Time seemed to stop. His fingertips brushed Grace's cheek, touching skin that was soft and warm. She did not step back. She did not turn away. She only stood there, her eyes locked on his, her breathing growing lighter, her heart beating so fast she feared he could hear it. Vincent did not pull his hand away either. He let his fingers linger on her cheek for 1 second, then 2, as if he were trying to memorize the feeling. How long had it been since he had touched anyone with tenderness? How long had it been since he had allowed himself to soften in front of a woman? At last he drew his hand back, but the space between them remained so close Grace could feel his breath. "Not only because of Rose," Vincent whispered, answering the question she had asked earlier. "Not only because of Rose." Grace said nothing. She did not need to. In that moment, on a wind-swept balcony with the city shimmering below, they both understood something between them had changed. Something fragile as morning mist, and yet as fierce as a slow-burning flame in the heart of winter. And for the first time in 10 years, Vincent Moretti did not feel cold anymore. 2 weeks after Sophie's birthday night, the lives of the 3 of them had slowly settled into a new rhythm. Grace and Sophie were still in the safe apartment, but they often came to Vincent's penthouse for dinner, and Vincent had begun showing up at Sophie's school to pick her up whenever Grace was busy working. Everything seemed to be getting better, until that fateful afternoon. Derek had not given up the way he had promised. After the humiliating beating in front of the school gate, he disappeared and looked for a way to take revenge. He knew he could not face that terrifying man on his own, so he did what only a desperate man would dare to do. He contacted the Kowalski gang, the longtime enemies of the Moretti family, and traded information about Grace and Sophie in exchange for money and drugs. The Kowalski gang recognized the opportunity at once. Vincent Moretti had a weakness, and they were going to exploit it. That afternoon, as Grace was walking Sophie home from school, a black van suddenly roared up and blocked their path. Before Grace could react, 2 masked men jumped out, grabbed her and Sophie, and shoved them into the back of the vehicle despite their screams and struggles. Sophie shrieked, calling for her mother, calling for Vincent, but no one came. The van sped away, leaving Sophie's small backpack on the sidewalk, and the sound of her crying faded as the vehicle turned into a dark alley. Vincent was in a meeting with his men when Marcus burst in, his face pale as someone who had just seen a ghost. He did not say a word. He only set a phone on the table and played a voice message. A strange man's voice came through, cold and defiant. "Moretti, we have something you value. The woman and the little girl. If you want to see them alive, come to the old warehouse at the South Docks at midnight. Alone, no weapons, or we will send you pieces of them." Then Derek's laughter rang out at the end of the message, the unhinged laughter of a man who believed he had won. The room fell into a dead, suffocating silence. The men at the table, the ones who had followed Vincent through life and death, all felt the air change. They had seen their boss angry many times. They had seen him cold and ruthless. But what they saw now was more frightening than either. Vincent did not shout. He did not slam his fists. He did not say a single word for one long minute. He only sat there, his gray eyes slowly darkening, turning cold as two bottomless pits of ice. Those were no longer the eyes of the man who had cried in Sophie's arms 2 weeks earlier. Those were the eyes of a mafia boss. The eyes of a man who had killed dozens without a tremor in his hand. "Gather, everyone," Vincent said at last, his voice low and even, and chilling in its calm. "Everyone. Every weapon. Everything we have." Marcus swallowed hard. "Boss, they said you have to go alone." Vincent stood, his gaze cut straight through Marcus like knives. "I do not care what they said. Bring Grace and Sophie back to me, at any cost. If a single hair on their heads is harmed, I will burn the Kowalski gang to the ground, every last one of them." No one dared argue. No one dared meet their boss's eyes now. At midnight, the Moretti convoy moved toward the docks. Not one vehicle as demanded, but more than 20, carrying nearly 50 men armed to the teeth. Vincent sat in the front seat of the lead SUV, a loaded gun in his hand, his eyes fixed forward without blinking. He was no longer the gentleman who had held Sophie and cried. He was Vincent Moretti, the boss Chicago feared, and tonight he would show the Kowalskis exactly why. The assault was swift and brutal. The Kowalski gang did not expect Vincent to bring an army, and they were completely caught off guard. Gunfire tore through the night. Screams, shattering glass, bodies dropping onto cold concrete. Vincent led the charge, storming into the warehouse like a beast unleashed, taking down anyone in his way without hesitation. Blood spattered his clothes, but he did not stop. Nothing could stop him. He found Grace and Sophie in a small room at the corner of the warehouse, tied to chairs, their mouths sealed with tape. Sophie was sobbing, and Grace was unconscious, a dried streak of blood on her forehead. Vincent's heart felt as if someone had crushed it in a fist, but he had no time to fall apart. He cut the ropes, tore away the tape, and pulled Sophie tight against him. "I'm here," he whispered, his voice shaking. "I'm here. You're safe now." Derek stood in the corner of the room, shaking like a leaf, his eyes darting as he searched for a way out. But there was no way out. Vincent set Sophie down and told her to turn away. Then he walked slowly toward Derek. His eyes were ice, and Derek knew that tonight he would not get another chance. "I warned you," Vincent said, his voice low and deliberate. "I gave you an opportunity, but you did not listen." Derek dropped to his knees, begging, crying, pleading, but Vincent did not soften. He did not kill Derek, not out of mercy, but because he wanted him to live in fear for the rest of his life. He only broke both of Derek's legs so he would never be able to chase Grace and Sophie again, then turned and walked away, leaving Derek's screams echoing into the night. 1 year after that stormy night, Vincent Moretti's penthouse had changed completely. The cold, soulless chill of white walls and minimalist furniture was gone. Now the apartment carried the marks of life, of love, of a real family. Sophie's drawings were hung everywhere, from pictures of 3 people holding hands to bright, colorful butterflies. In one corner of the living room stood a small bookshelf packed with comic books and coloring books. The kitchen was no longer silent and untouched. It often breathed out the warm scent of family meals, even if sometimes the food was a little burned because Vincent was still learning how to cook. That afternoon, golden sunlight poured through the large glass windows, lighting the corner where Grace sat and painted. She had returned to her love of art, and the canvas in front of her showed a garden filled with roses, with 3 figures watering the plants together. Her auburn hair was pinned up neatly, a few strands loose around her face, and on her lips was a satisfied smile she had thought she had forgotten how to wear. Sophie was running around the room, her clear laughter ringing like music. She was 8 now, taller, stronger, and her eyes no longer carried the fear of the years she had lived under violence. In her glossy brown hair was the purple butterfly hair clip Vincent had given her on her birthday, and she never took it off. The door opened, and Sophie stopped playing at once and ran straight for the entrance. "Dad, Vincent is home," she shouted, bouncing on her toes. Vincent walked in, took off his coat and hung it on the hook, and caught Sophie as she launched herself into his arms. He lifted her up, spun her once until she squealed with laughter, then set her down and kissed her forehead. A year earlier, if someone had told him he would do things like this, he would have thought they were insane. But now, this was what he looked forward to most each day. Grace stood and walked to Vincent, then kissed him softly on the lips. They had married 6 months earlier, in a small ceremony with only Marcus and a few of their closest people. No spectacle, no luxury, only love, and a promise to stay together for life. The wedding band on Grace's finger caught the light, and every time Vincent saw it, he felt his heart grow a little warmer. "How was today?" Grace asked, smoothing the collar of his shirt. "Much better," Vincent replied with a smile. "I came home early to have dinner with my family." Came home early, something the Vincent of a year ago would never have done. But now he always arranged his work so he could be home on time. To eat dinner with Grace and Sophie, to read to his daughter before she slept, to sit by the window with his wife and watch the city at night. He was still the boss of the Moretti family, still running his underground empire, but he had learned how to balance darkness and light. After dinner, when Sophie was asleep in her own room, Vincent walked into his study. He stopped in front of the large wooden desk, where 2 butterfly hair clips lay side by side inside a small glass case. One was older, slightly faded with time, the one Sophie had given him on the fateful snowy night. The other was newer and brighter, the one he had given Sophie on her 7th birthday. Vincent reached out and gently touched the glass case, his gray eyes softening as he looked at the 2 clips. Beside the case was a photo of Rose, her radiant smile still bright as ever. And beside that photo was a new one, taken on the wedding day. Vincent, Grace, and Sophie, smiling happily beneath an arch of white roses. "Do you see it, Rose?" Vincent whispered, his voice gentle, as if speaking to the person he loved most. "I found my way home. I found the happiness you always wanted for me. Thank you for leading them to me. Thank you for not abandoning me, even though you had to go so far away." He looked out the window, where city lights glittered like stars, and in that moment, he could have sworn he felt a warm breeze pass by, soft as an embrace, as if Rose were standing beside him, smiling in quiet satisfaction. Grace stepped in and stood next to her husband, resting her head on his shoulder. She said nothing. She only took his hand and stood there with him, looking toward Rose's photograph. 2 people who had loved her had found each other, and together they had built a family Rose would have been proud of if she were still alive. Sometimes the greatest gifts come from the most unexpected places. A dinner on a cold, snowy night, an old hair clip, a 6-year-old girl with clear eyes and a pure heart, and a strong woman who never gave up hope, even after life had taken too much from her. Vincent Moretti, the most powerful mafia boss in Chicago, found something money and power could never buy: love, family, redemption. And it all began on a night of falling snow, when he chose to share table number 7 with 2 strangers. This story reminds us that behind the coldest exterior there may be a heart starving to be loved, that the deepest wounds are sometimes healed by the smallest gestures. That family is not always the people who share our blood, but the people who choose to stay, to love, and to protect one another through every storm life brings. Open your heart to the people around you, because you never know who might change your life forever. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you do not miss the next moving story. Please hit like and share this video with the people you love to spread the message of love and hope. We would truly love to know how you feel about Vincent, Grace, and Sophie's story. Have you ever met someone who changed your life the way Sophie changed Vincent's? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and we will read every line from the depths of your hearts. Thank you for taking the time to listen to today's story. We wish everyone watching this video strong health and a life filled with joy and peace each day. Remember that no matter how hard life becomes, there is always light at the end of the road for those who do not give up.